Bueno, hello again, everybody. Tonight will be our streaming of tonight will be in English because our tonight we have the great honor of having as a guest Mr. Walter Brock, economist and economy professor at Loyola University in Louisiana in the United States, and he will be talking about one of his latest works, his book on the privatization of space called Space Capitalism. So, Mr. Block, if you want to introduce yourself, or for a second time here.
Well, I'm a professor at Loyola University in New Orleans, and I have a PhD in economics from Columbia. And my main claim to fame is I once shook the hand of Ludwig von Mises. I never washed it since. It's a little dirty, but if you shake my hand, you channel Mises.
Perfect. Well, and tonight we also have Jacobo, who will be joining us as our usual SFL Galicia presentator. So, Walter, the first thing I wanted to, if you want to talk a little bit about the book on space capitalism, like present it or something, do a little summary, as you wish.
Sure. Well, I have 3 books on privatization, one on roads, one on oceans, and one on space. And what they all have in common is I favor privatization. My motto is if it moves, privatize it. If it doesn't move, privatize it. And since everything either moves or doesn't move, privatize everything. Why? Well, 2 reasons. One, deontology or rights, and the other is practicality or utilitarianism. Namely, if we have private property, there's no coercion. The alternatives to private property are either government ownership, which is coercive because the government demands money against our will, or non-ownership, which means the tragedy of the commons. So that's one reason why we should have privatization. Another is the market is more efficient.
Mr. Block, one thing. Could you explain for the public what the tragedy of the commons is for just a little?
Sure. The tragedy of the commons is when nobody owns anything or we all own it in common, we tend to overuse it. We always had cows private. So if you killed a cow, your cow, you didn't have a cow tomorrow, you were very careful as to how many cows you killed. But buffalo were owned in common for many years. People didn't own the buffalo. So if you killed one, you wouldn't have it tomorrow anyway, so you might as well kill it, even if it's not really that important to you. And the same with overfishing. Nobody owns the fish, so people have more, and we fish so much that the fish stocks run out. And they have to make a fishing season, and they have to limit the quality of the boats and the size of the boats. Whereas they don't have to do anything like that with cows or chickens or anything like that. And the reason that the elephants and the rhinos are going extinct or endangered is they're owned in common. Nobody protects them. We overuse things that we have in common. If I give you a can of beer, you'll drink it at a slow rate. But if I say I'm going to give you a gallon of beer and everyone gets a straw, then everyone's going to drink more quickly because they want to get the beer before other people get it. So that would be the tragedy of the commons, and that means non-ownership. Government ownership is very inefficient. In the Soviet Union, what was it? I think it was 75% of 97% of the land was government owned, and they produced 75% of the crops. 3% of the land was privately owned, and they produced 25% of the crops. And it's similar with the oceans. The oceans are 75% of the Earth's surface, and they probably produce 1% of the GDP, the world GDP. And on the land, it's 25% of the Earth's surface is land, and we produce 99% of the GDP. It's a little unfair because most of the people are on the land, but it gives you an idea of how inefficient government can be. So this would be the case for privatization of anything. And then I apply it to roads and highways and streets because a lot of people die on the highways, and if we had competition, we would have safer roads. And I apply it to oceans and rivers and lakes. And now for the issue that you're talking about, space. And there are 2 aspects of space. One is the space race, or the move toward the moon and the Mars. And the other is when we get there, who should own what land? And what I'm saying is that we should privatize the land. The government shouldn't own all the moon, and it shouldn't own all of Mars. They have at the United Nations, the oceans are the common heritage of all of mankind. So everybody should own the oceans, even if you have nothing to do with the oceans. Well, they're probably going to do the same thing with Mars and the moon. And this would be a tragedy because government is less efficient, and a non-ownership leads to the tragedy of the commons. So what I'm saying is we should privatize the moon and Mars, just like we have private property in most civilized countries.
Mm-hmm. So one of my first questions when it comes to the private sector in space, which is at the end what the people who would be in charge of colonizing space, exploring space, if we didn't have the state to do it, which I understand is a bad idea, according to the book. It's a bad idea to have the state in charge of space exploration. There's a theory defended by many astronauts and people that are related to space exploration. They say that currently space, from a private perspective, is only about investment. You can only invest money because you don't get the direct benefits. For example, you won't get to there are enterprises, companies trying to do space travel for tourists, but they say they will be able to do it in like 10 years. So there's this theory going around that currently space is only investment, and since it's only investment, no private companies would be interested in it. And this theory says that without the government, we wouldn't be actually interested in space. That basically it's an argument given by statists, basically.
That's true. What's wrong with investment? I mean, if it were true, there's nothing wrong with it. If the only reason to invest in the space race was investment, that would be fine. Maybe the government first landed people on the moon 25 years ago. Maybe that was too soon. Maybe if it was up to private enterprise, they would do it a little later, but better. In other words, it's not always the best policy to do it quickly. Maybe you should invest in oxygen and in keeping people alive and in putting in an atmosphere in Mars and stuff like that. So just because the government was there first doesn't mean that was optimal. It might have been better to invest in rocketry more and then go to the moon and then have a colony on the moon. Whereas what the government did is 25 years ago, it had a man on the moon or 2 men on the moon, and then it didn't do anything. Secondly, there's also consumption, and people enjoy it. And as you say, there might be tourism in 10 or 20 years, and probably it'll be sooner with private than with public. And then also it's good advertising. I mean, if a company can get to Mars or the moon, they can. Everyone would be inclined to buy their products. So I don't see the idea that just because it's investment, somehow the government has an inner track or a more efficient investment. Private companies can invest much better than governments can.
So yeah, but basically, I just wanted to comment you about this. Usually, a very statist argument that without the public sector, there would be no space exploration and no space travel at all, not even as an idea.
Well, there might not be any space exploration yet. Whereas with government, there was obviously 25 years ago, but maybe it's optimal. Maybe the government was premature. They got there before we had the ability to set up a colony. Maybe the best way is to wait 5 or 10 years and then have a colony. Another benefit of private is the way the government would do, they'd send up a rocket, and then when the rocket came down, that was it. The rocket was lost. It broke up. Whereas private people now bring a rocket up and then they save the rocket coming back down. Imagine, which city are you guys in?
I'm currently in Santiago, in northern Spain, but Jacobo is in Poland.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm right now in Warsaw, Poland.
Okay, look, suppose I took a trip in a plane from New Orleans to Warsaw or Spain, and then we had to junk the plane. Do you know how expensive travel would be? That you can only use a plane once? Whereas now, happily with planes, the planes go back and forth. They can last for years. Whereas when the government was doing it, it was one shot, and that was it. The rocket ship is gone. Whereas private people reuse rockets, so it makes it a lot cheaper.
So that's another thing that now that you mentioned the rockets that come back from space and land and can be used again, I believe the company to do this was SpaceX. You mentioned that in the book, and you talk about the CEO of this company, which is Elon Musk. And in the book, you mentioned that he's not actually a libertarian and that you don't believe him to be the person to bring like full privatization to space. But it is true that he said once once he talked about the Mars colony, a possible Mars colony that would be succeeding from Earth and rejecting the authority of the states that dominate our planet. So that's something I wanted you to talk about. What do you think about, so to say, space anarchism or space succession?
Well, I certainly think that laissez-faire capitalism is the best policy on Earth, and I don't see why it wouldn't be the best policy on Mars or on the moon. The thing with Musk was, the question was, he got government subsidies. And the question is it justified to take government subsidies? And my view is it's only just for libertarians. Only libertarians should take government subsidies. Everyone else, they're all criminals and they shouldn't have government subsidies. So the question was, well, is Musk a libertarian or not? And then we went through his speeches, and there was not that much libertarianism there. Therefore, my co-author and I decided that it would be unjust for him to get government subsidies. He should do it all with his private money. But a libertarian, look, I am a libertarian, and right now I work at a private university, but I used to work at a public university, University of Central Arkansas, which is public. And before that, I taught at Baruch and Stony Brook and Rutgers. And I got a salary. Was it justified for me to take the salary? Yes, because I am promoting liberty. Whereas Marxist professors, I don't think it's just for them to be teaching in a public university. So we applied the same insight or the same viewpoint to whether it would be justified for Musk or anyone else to take a government subsidy. And we went over all of his speeches, and there was not much libertarianism, was a lot incompatible with libertarianism. So we concluded it was not justified for him to take subsidies.
Yeah, that's the thing I wanted to ask you afterwards, because you mentioned that you make basically a compilation of things he has said to explain why you believe he's not a libertarian. But it is true that once he mentioned the possibility of getting to his Mars colony with other humans and then succeeding from the Earth, because basically the way he saw it, the state or any state would not be able to exercise authority on space, and he would be safe from that authority. And that's why many people thought that he was a libertarian in the first place, I believe.
Well, he had some libertarian elements. Of course, if he wants to have a government on Mars or a government on the moon, that would be less. But I mean, if you go through a famous person's speeches, you'll find a little bit of libertarianism. But our assessment was overall he was not really a libertarian. But certainly, the UN should not run Mars, and the UN should not run the moon, and the United States should run anything over there. If there's a colony, those people should be free.
Maybe also the idea of Elon Musk being libertarian came also from at least the support he has been given to the idea of Bitcoin or different like private money.
Well, I mean, Bitcoin, I think, is a private money. So if you support Bitcoin, you're on the side of the angels. I favor the gold standard even more, because when people were free to choose, they chose gold. And right now, Bitcoin really isn't the money. It's a quasi money, or it's maybe a semi money or something like that. But that would be another element where he is libertarian.
Mm-hmm.
But well, the thing I wanted to go with this question: do you believe? Because in the book you speak about how space would be better under private control, But I wanted to take it to the next step, because you talk about this in one of the chapters. What do you think as space being the place where you can escape of state authority? This idea Musk talked about once.
Well, hopefully you can escape government activity. I mean, people try to set up new countries in the middle of the ocean. They have seasteading. You get a bunch of platforms, and you have a separate from any country, and governments don't much like that. And you know, if the seastead is 10 miles off the coast of California, the government can stop it easily. They can't stop it that easily on the moon or Mars. And I think it's very important that we have colonies on the moon and Mars, because I'm a humanist. Some of my best friends are human beings. Actually, all of my best friends are human beings. My family are human beings. I like to see the human beings survive and prosper and multiply. And I'm always afraid of a nuclear war on the Earth. And if we have a nuclear war on the Earth, at least if there are some people on Mars and some people on the moon, the human race will go on. And I favor that. So it's sort of like, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. You've heard of that aphorism. Yeah. Don't put all the human beings on one planet. If we're on many planets, or 3 planets, the moon and Mars and the Earth, we have a better chance of surviving. And I understand that one of the moons of Neptune or Jupiter is also habitable, possibly by human beings. I don't know if that's true, but eventually with technology, maybe we could spread even further out, and ultimately into other solar systems. That would be even more wonderful. Look, I have grandchildren and I want them to prosper. And the more likelihood of them prospering is when people are not just on the Earth.
Yes, about the moon you mentioned, I believe it's one of the moons of Jupiter that water was found in. So yes, this is something that that could happen in the future. I thought it was very interesting when you mentioned that in the book about not putting all the eggs in the same basket. So one of the other things I wanted to ask you about, but you already explained it a bit, is about the morality of getting state funds, because all the corporations that are currently investing in Spain are actually state funded or somehow collaborating with the state. So why do you believe that only libertarians have the right to state money? Or no, not the right, but why do you think that it's only okay when libertarians get the state money?
Well, I think I would go along with only libertarians have a right, or at least non-statists have a right. If a person is politically neutral, it would be okay also. But if you're supporting statism, I think you're a criminal. Or if ever we have a libertarian Nuremberg trial, if libertarians take over and we want to have a Nuremberg trial, well, the people who supported statism, who volunteered to give extra money to the state that they didn't even owe in taxes, those people are problematic, because the government is a criminal organization. The government demands money from you and you didn't agree to pay. Well, if I come up to you, Daniel Jacobo, and demand money from you and threaten you with a gun, I'm a criminal. Well, from the anarchist point of view, and look, I'm just a philosophical anarchist. I don't believe in guns or shooting anybody or anything like that. But from a philosophical point of view, the government is an illicit organization. And anyone who supports that and aids and abets it is aiding and abetting criminals. Therefore, I don't think it's justified for them to have extra money. So I would say either libertarians or apolitical people would be justified.
As long as they don't support it, basically.
Precisely.
So, I had a last before Jacobo has other questions for you, but before he starts, I wanted to ask you something. Last time we had you here, we talked about climate change denial. I don't know if you remember. And the thing is, you now mentioned the moon landings that happened in the 1960s and 70s. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the denial of the moon landings? What do you think about the people that say that the moon landings were faked by the US government?
Well, I think the evidence is pretty good that they actually landed on the moon. Look, as far as I'm concerned, the Earth is flat. I mean, it looks flat to me. Right? I mean, you look at it, it doesn't look round. Of course, you go up in an airplane. Well, you have to go very high before you see the curvature of the Earth. But from where I stand, it looks flat. But when when experts say something and they all agree, and there really is nobody who's denying this. I've never heard of anyone denying that actually people were on the moon. It's sort of like, is Pluto a planet? Some astronomers say yes, some say no, and the way they're discussing it is reasonably. Nobody's calling anyone else a denier. But when it comes to global warming and temperature change, it's not true. The one side, the left side, is saying that the people who disagree are deniers. You know where they get the word denier? Holocaust denier, which is a different sort of a thing. Look, in the 1970s, they said that the Earth is getting colder and it's capitalism's fault.
Yes.
In the 1990s, they said the Earth is getting warmer and it's capitalism's fault. Now they say temperature is changing. It's always changing. And guess whose fault it is? Capitalism. So these people are not intellectually serious. And then they're trying to put people in jail or lose their jobs if they disagree with the latest mishegas, to use a Yiddish word, which means craziness. So these people are not to be believed. But I don't know of anyone who says that people didn't really go on the moon in the 1960s. I think it's pretty much established that they did.
Well, for the record, there are people who deny it. I'm not one of them, but it exists. There are people who say it was... in fact, one of the theories was that the moon landing was faked in Spain, that the moon you see in the video was actually a desert somewhere here. But look, I don't believe it.
There are people who seriously say the Earth is flat.
Yes. So there can be everything.
What are we going to do with them? I don't know. Ignore them.
Yeah. Bueno, Jacobo, I believe you also wanted to comment something. So
so maybe we can continue with some different topics. In this case, more related with the political situation now. And I would like to ask some questions about how libertarianism should act, or at least should approach to some situation that is currently happening in Spain. So just to let you know, in Spain, Spanish government is now having some trouble with Morocco in terms of frontier and borders stuff. So we have some population from Morocco that came illegally to Spain and crossed the borders. Of course, allowed by the Moroccan government. So some libertarians are saying that the groups of who consider themselves libertarians should not be asking the Spanish government to retain those people for not entering illegally to Spain. And some others are saying that as long as the government is the only way now to protect our private property, we should ask the government to protect our private property from that people that came in illegally to Spain. So I would like to ask what are your thoughts on this topic, and of course, giving some advices on how to approach to this situation.
Well, we have the same, it's interesting when you said there was an issue with Spain. I thought you were going to talk about the secession of a part of Spain. And I favor the secession of anyone from anywhere, because one of the basic elements of libertarianism is free association. No one should be forced to associate with people against their will. But now you're asking a question that we have the same thing, people coming from Central America through Mexico into Texas and Arizona, a very similar thing. And we have a lot of libertarians who are open borders, and then there are libertarians who are not open borders. And it's interesting that the people who are open borders think that all of the immigrants are wonderful people and they won't be criminals and they're just great people. And whereas the people who want to regulate think that many immigrants are nice people and productive, but there are many criminals and rapists. And you get this case in Sweden and in Germany where women are afraid to go out with a miniskirt because the immigrants think if you wear a miniskirt, you're a criminal and they can rape you. I mean, it's just horrible.
Yeah, Mr. Block, I wanted to add something to what Jacobo said. There's a main difference I see between the US and Spain, and it is that in Spain, we do not, according to the state, of course, we do not possess the legal right to defend our private property with lethal methods. In fact, we do not possess the right at all. We always have to wait for the police to come and defend it for us. We don't have the right to defend ourselves, physically speaking.
Oh boy, that's horrible. I mean, in the U.S. they're always trying to atrophy this with the gun control and stuff like that. But that's a horrible situation, and I wish the libertarians in Spain would be able to change that. But to get back to the immigration problem, you see, I got into a debate with Hans Hoppe, who is a famous libertarian, and
yes, we know him.
He favors regulating borders. He wants to have legal immigration, but I mean, look, he was a legal immigrant from Germany into the U.S. The example I use is, suppose an immigrant comes from Mars or from Africa or Asia, it doesn't matter where, and he comes in the middle of the Rocky Mountains in Wyoming, or he comes in the middle of Alaska and he goes to virgin territory, never before been touched by any human being, and he starts homesteading and putting in a crop and having chickens and whatever. Along comes a U.S. Policeman and says, you have to leave. Did this person violate any libertarian law? And I say, no, didn't violate any libertarian law. Now, what Hans Hoppe says is, well, the government really owns the virgin territory in the middle of Wyoming and the Rocky Mountains in the middle of Alaska in trust for all the people. And therefore, the Martian is violating property rights. And I say, Hans, you're an anarcho-capitalist. How can the government have, guardianship over land? And did the government ever mix their labor with the land? No, it's virgin territory. So open borders. But now the question comes, how do we deal with rapists and murderers? And suppose 1 trillion people from Mars want to come into the United States or Spain. 1 trillion. They're all very nice people. Do we really want 1 trillion people? No, it gets too crowded. So how can we have our cake and eat it? How can we not jettison libertarian theory by saying that the government owns the land in trust for people and also keep some people out? And the answer is, privatize every square inch of the country. Privatize the land, privatize the rivers, privatize the lakes, privatize everything. And now if some immigrant comes from Mars, he's a trespasser. Now, it's true, there is such a thing called sub-marginal land that people don't want because it's not economically viable, like in the middle of Alaska or in the middle of the Rocky Mountains in Wyoming. Well, that's true. But now that we're worried about immigrants, everyone should maybe have charity, and we should go out and homestead that land, even though it's not economically viable, as a matter of insurance or as a matter of protection. So that's my solution to the immigration problem. Open borders, privatize everything, and that way we can keep two things. One, libertarian theory, which Hans is willing to jettison, and the other is protection, which he's not willing to jettison. And I say we can have our cake and eat it too. We can have both. We can have protection and adhere to libertarianism. And I don't like this idea of jettisoning libertarian theory just to have protection. I want both. I want protection against too many immigrants, and also I don't want to give up on libertarian theory.
Yeah,
So-
I mean,
so
security. Security ends up being one of the reasons many people end up believing in the state, and the reason so many libertarians also believe in the state, though they call themselves libertarian, is precisely because of security, because they fear what might happen if there was no state security.
Right, but we can have security and libertarianism
Yes.
if we privatize everything. Remember, if it moves, privatize it. If it doesn't move, privatize it. Everything either moves or doesn't move. Privatize everything, and then we solve the problem. Look,
Yes.
it's the same thing. Should school children wear uniforms?
So,
Who knows? What you do is you have private schools. Some say you have to wear a uniform. Some say you don't. There's no right way. Should students wear a uniform or not? The privatization solves a lot of problems that otherwise would challenge libertarians.
Yeah,
Guys, it's a half hour. I got to get off, but it was really enjoyable. And please invite me again in a month or so, and we'll have more discussion.
Mr. Block, one sec. Could you stay for 1 minute, please? Ok, vale. Bueno, muchas gracias a todos por venir y buenas noches y nos vemos en el próximo directo, como siempre.